In the heart of Colorado Springs, where the city fades into quiet solitude, a small diner hums with the warmth of worn red booths and the faint aroma of sizzling bacon. Lena Martinez, 37, moves through its rhythm with a steady grace, her hands calloused from years of work, her eyes carrying the weight of a life she keeps tucked away. She's just a waitress, pouring coffee and serving eggs. But to those who slip through the cracks, she's a quiet beacon of care. One rainy morning, a girl no older than 10 creeps in, her dark hair tangled, her oversized sweater swallowing her small frame. Sophia, as Lena will later learn, sits with haunting stillness, her hollow eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window, carrying a story too heavy for her young heart. Lena doesn't know why this girl feels so familiar, like a shadow of her own past, but something stirs within her, a pull to offer more than just a meal. As whispers of judgment rise from the diner's regulars, Lena's simple act of kindness sets off a ripple that will unravel secrets, challenge prejudices, and prove that even the smallest gesture can mend a broken world. What is Sophia hiding, and how will Lena's compassion change them all? Stay with us as this touching story unfolds, revealing the power of a single heart to heal a community. In a quiet Colorado Springs diner, Lena Martinez, a kind-hearted waitress, serves breakfast daily to a silent, traumatized girl named Sophia. Despite criticism from customers and her boss, Lena persists, unaware Sophia is the daughter of a UN diplomat, Dr. Elena Vasquez. When Sophia's identity is revealed, the diner's regulars confront their prejudices, and Lena's compassion is celebrated. But who is Sophia really? What secrets does her past hold? Will Lena's kindness spark a larger change? The story unfolds, leaving you wondering how one small act can ripple through a community, transforming hearts and lives. Subscribe to our channel to celebrate kindness that changes lives. Subscribe to our channel for inspiring tales like Lena and Sophia's, where compassion triumphs over judgment. Share your thoughts with hashtag kindness matters, and let's spread stories that remind us every small act counts. Support us today. In a forgotten corner of Colorado Springs, where the city blurred into solitude, there was a diner that seemed to exist for those who needed to fade away. Its red vinyl booths, worn and cracked, held the lingering scent of bacon grease and coffee that had been brewing since dawn. Lena Martinez, 37, moved through its rhythm with a quiet strength. Her hands, rough from years of labor, and her eyes, heavy with unspoken burdens, carried the weight of a life she never shared. For 3 years, she'd been the morning waitress, learning to spot the loneliness that clung to people like a shadow. One rain-drenched morning, the door's chime pierced the steady drum of water against the windows. A small figure slipped inside, barely a ripple in the diner's hum. A girl no more than 10, her dark hair a tangled mess framing a face too serious for her years. Her oversized sweater, faded to a ghost of its original color, hung loosely over jeans riddled with holes. Her sneakers, threadbare and damp, squeaked faintly as she crossed to the corner booth by the window. She sat with perfect posture, hands folded, her gaze locked on the rain-soaked parking lot. Her eyes, hollow and heavy, carried the weight of too many unseen wounds. Lena approached, her steps careful, her voice warm and low. "Hey, sweetheart, can I get you something to eat?" The girl's eyes flicked up, meeting Lena's for a brief, fragile moment before retreating to the window. No words. The diner's rhythm continued, forks scraping plates, coffee cups clinking, but the girl's presence drew attention. A businessman glanced over his newspaper, curious. 2 construction workers at the counter whispered to each other. An elderly woman, her lips tight with disapproval, shook her head. Lena tried again, her tone soft as a lullaby. "You hungry, honey?" Still no response. But the girl's careful stillness stirred something in Lena, a memory of her own youth, of nights spent with nowhere to turn, when a stranger's kindness had been her only anchor. Without pressing no further, Lena turned to the kitchen. She prepared a modest breakfast, scrambled eggs, golden and warm, toast with a generous smear of butter, and a glass of orange juice, bright as a sunrise. She set it down gently before the girl. "This is for you, no charge. Eat what you want." The girl's eyes widened, a flicker of life breaking through her guarded expression. She picked up the fork, her movements deliberate, eating with a quiet grace that spoke of manners taught in some other life. 20 minutes later, the plate was spotless. The girl stood, looked directly at Lena, her second moment of connection, and offered a single solemn nod of gratitude. Then she vanished into the rain, leaving only the soft chime of the door behind her. "That kid got money to pay?" the businessman called out, his voice edged with judgment. Lena turned, her face calm but resolute. "She's not causing trouble. Everyone deserves a meal." He shrugged, retreating to his paper. But Lena felt the weight of other eyes, whispers and sidelong glances from the booths. She didn't waver. Something about the girl, her quiet resilience, had rooted itself in Lena's heart. The next morning at exactly 7 a.m., the girl returned. Same booth, same silence, same meticulous posture. Lena brought the same breakfast without a word, and the girl accepted it with that same nod. It became their unspoken ritual. For 2 weeks, the girl appeared each morning, her presence a steady thread in the diner's tapestry. Lena began to look forward to these quiet visits, the girl's calm bringing a strange peace to the morning bustle. Their wordless connection felt like a shared secret, a bond that needed no explanation. But the whispers grew sharper. "You're enabling vagrancy," Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman, declared one morning, her voice brittle with conviction. "That child belongs in school, not scrounging for handouts." Lena's reply was soft but unyielding. "I'm not giving charity. I'm feeding a hungry kid." The businessman's grumbling spread to other customers, his complaints like a low hum. Frank, one of the construction workers, smirked and tossed out jabs about Lena's bleeding heart. Yet the girl remained untouched by their words, her gaze fixed on the window, her silence a quiet defiance against the world's judgment. In the heart of a sleepy small-town diner, Lena Martinez moved with quiet purpose, her hands deftly balancing trays of steaming coffee and plates of eggs. Every morning she served a young girl named Sophia Vasquez, a fragile figure who slipped into the diner with the stealth of a shadow. Sophia's presence was a silent ritual. Same booth, same careful posture, same unspoken gratitude for the warm meal Lena placed before her. To Lena, this act of kindness was a lifeline, a small rebellion against a world that seemed to have misplaced its heart. She didn't know Sophia's story, only that the girl's eyes carried a weight no child should bear. Lena's own heart ached at the thought of a kid left to fend for herself, and each plate of food she offered felt like a promise to keep her safe, if only for an hour each day. But the diner wasn't a bubble of goodwill. The regulars, a mix of weathered locals and rough-edged construction workers, began to notice Sophia's daily visits. Whispers turned to grumbles, and grumbles to outright disdain. The construction crew, led by a burly man named Frank, tossed around terms like freeloader and charity case with sneering amusement. Their jokes stung, but Lena brushed them off, her focus fixed on Sophia's hunched shoulders and the way she ate with deliberate care, as if savoring every bite might make it last longer. To Lena, the criticism was noise, irrelevant compared to the quiet trust growing in Sophia's guarded glances. By the third week, the undercurrent of judgment grew bolder. Mrs. Patterson, a sharp-tongued elderly woman who held court every Tuesday with her coffee and complaints, decided to make her disapproval public. "This is getting out of hand," she declared, her voice slicing through the diner's morning hum. "That vagrant child is dragging this place down. Decent folks don't want to eat where there's begging." The word vagrant landed like a slap. Sophia froze, her fork hovering midair, her small frame tensing as if bracing for a blow. Lena's jaw tightened, her hands clenching the rag she used to wipe the counter. "She's not begging," Lena said, her voice steady but edged with fire. "She's a kid who needs breakfast, a kid whose parents don't seem to care enough to feed her." Mrs. Patterson's eyes narrowed. "You're enabling bad behavior," she snapped. "Someone ought to call social services." At those words, Sophia's face changed. Her eyes widened with a raw, visceral fear that made Lena's stomach twist. The girl's fork clattered softly against the plate, and she began to rise, her movements jerky, like a deer ready to bolt. "Wait," Lena said, sliding into the booth across from her, her voice softening to a near whisper. "Nobody's calling anyone. You're safe here." Sophia's gaze darted over Lena's face, searching for truth. Slowly, she sank back into her seat, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the table. Frank, leaning back in his booth with a smirk, couldn't resist piling on. "You're encouraging this nonsense," he called out. "Kid needs to learn the world doesn't hand out free lunches." Lena's patience frayed, but she held her ground. "Everyone deserves breakfast," she said, her voice quieter now, but no less firm. The words felt like a mantra, a shield against the growing tide of disapproval. But the real test came when David Chen, the diner's owner, walked in during the breakfast rush. An unusual sight, as he rarely showed his face before noon. The room fell silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Chen's sharp eyes scanned the diner, pausing on Sophia, who sat in her usual corner booth, her head bowed over her plate. "Lena," Chen called, his voice cutting through the hush. "A word." Lena's heart sank as she approached him by the register, her apron suddenly feeling like a lead weight. "Is it true you've been giving away free food?" he asked, his tone low but caring enough for nearby customers to lean in. Lena swallowed hard. "She's just a child, Mr. Chen. One breakfast a day. It's not hurting anyone." Chen's expression didn't soften. "It's hurting my profit margin," he said. "Customers are complaining. This is a business, not a soup kitchen. Give that kid free food one more time, and you're out of a job." The threat landed like a punch, and Lena's eyes flicked to Sophia, who was watching now, her face pale, her meal untouched. "I understand," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible as Chen nodded and walked out. The diner buzzed back to life, but the weight of every stare pressed on Lena as she returned to Sophia's table. Sitting across from her, she leaned in and spoke softly. "I'm sorry," she said, her throat tight. "I have to keep my job. But what if you came through the back door tomorrow early, before anyone else gets here?" Sophia tilted her head, a flicker of curiosity breaking through her guarded expression. The first sign of something other than caution Lena had seen. 7 a.m., back door by the kitchen, Lena continued. "I'll have something ready." For the first time in 3 weeks, Sophia spoke, her voice soft and laced with an accent Lena couldn't place. "Thank you," she said, the words barely above a whisper, but heavy with meaning. The next morning, Lena arrived half an hour early, her breath visible in the pre-dawn chill. Sophia was already there, a small silhouette waiting by the back door, her thin jacket no match for the cold. "Come in," Lena whispered, guiding her to a hidden corner tucked away from the main dining area. This became their new routine, secret breakfast in the quiet before the diner opened, a fragile pact of kindness that felt both vital and precarious. For a week, it worked flawlessly. Sophia would slip in, eat in silence while Lena prepped for the day, and vanish before the first customers arrived. Lena felt a quiet pride in their small defiance, a way to keep her promise to Sophia without risking her livelihood. But on the 8th day, everything shifted. Lena was pouring Sophia a second glass of orange juice when the sound of car doors slamming, multiple, sharp, and authoritative, cut through the morning stillness. Official voices followed, clipped and urgent. Lena's heart raced as she peered through the kitchen window and saw a black SUV parked outside, its sleek exterior out of place in the diner's gravel lot. The world she'd carefully built for Sophia was about to collide with something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. In the heart of a bustling Colorado Springs morning, Lena Martinez stood behind the counter of Chen's diner, her hands trembling slightly as she poured coffee into a chipped mug. The diner was a familiar chaos of clinking plates and murmured conversations, but Lena's attention was fixed on the back corner booth, where a young girl sat quietly, her small frame hunched over a plate of pancakes. The girl, Sophia, had been coming to the diner for weeks, always alone, always silent, her dark eyes carrying a weight far too heavy for someone so young. Lena had taken to slipping her free meals, scraps of toast, a bowl of oatmeal, whatever she could spare without drawing too much attention. She didn't know much about the girl, only that she needed kindness, and Lena had plenty of that to give, even if it came at a cost. The other customers hadn't been as generous with their opinions. Mrs. Patterson, a regular with a sharp tongue, had grumbled loudly about vagrants, cluttering up the diner, her words dripping with disdain as she eyed Sophia's worn jacket and unkempt hair. Frank, a burly construction worker who frequented the lunch counter, had chuckled at Lena's efforts, calling her a bleeding heart who was wasting good food on a lost cause. Even David Chen, the diner's owner, had warned Lena that her charity was bad for business, his voice stern but tinged with worry about the bottom line. Still, Lena persisted, driven by a quiet conviction that no one, especially not a child, should go hungry on her watch. That morning, as the sun streamed through the diner's smudged windows, Lena's heart sank at the sight of a sleek black SUV with government plates pulling up beside a Colorado Springs police cruiser. Her breath caught in her throat, a whispered, "Oh no," escaping her lips. She feared someone had reported Sophia to social services, despite her efforts to keep the girl's presence discreet. But when the door swung open, it wasn't social workers who entered. A woman in a tailored dark suit stepped inside, her presence commanding the room's attention. Two men flanked her, their posture rigid and disciplined, like soldiers trained to move as one. A badge hung from a lanyard around the woman's neck. But Lena, frozen by the coffee pot, couldn't make out the details. The woman's sharp eyes scanned the diner with a practiced efficiency, pausing only when they landed on Sophia's corner booth. Without hesitation, the woman strode across the linoleum floor, her heels clicking with purpose. When she reached Sophia's table, she did something that made Lena's breath hitch. She bowed her head, a gesture of profound respect. "There you are," the woman said, her voice warm with relief and something deeper, almost reverent. "We've been looking everywhere for you." Sophia, who had barely spoken in all the weeks that Lena had known her, looked up from her plate. For the first time, a smile broke across her face, not the timid, polite one she sometimes offered, but a radiant expression of recognition and trust. "Hello, Mother," she said softly, her accented voice clear and deliberate, as if the words had been waiting for this moment. The diner fell silent, the usual hum of conversation replaced by a stunned hush. Every customer, every cook, even David Chen behind the counter, stared at the scene unfolding in their small-town breakfast spot. The woman in the suit turned, her gaze sweeping the room before settling on Lena. "Are you the one who's been taking care of my daughter?" she asked, her tone direct but not unkind. Lena's throat tightened. She'd been threatened with losing her job for feeding Sophia, mocked by customers, and scolded by her boss. But now, standing under the weight of this woman's gaze, everything felt different. Yes," Lena stammered, clutching the coffee pot like a lifeline. "I've been giving her breakfast, but I didn't know, nobody told me who she was." The woman stepped closer and Lena could finally read the badge. United Nations Diplomatic Corps, Special Envoy. "My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez," the woman said, extending a hand. "I'm the UN Special Envoy for Refugee Crisis Management, and this is my daughter, Sophia." The only sound in the diner was the faint hum of the coffee machine, a steady drone against the weight of the moment. Customers sat frozen, their forks hovering over half-eaten plates as they tried to process the revelation. Dr. Vasquez's eyes moved across the room, lingering on faces that had spent weeks muttering complaints about Sophia's presence. When she spoke again, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had addressed world leaders. 3 weeks ago, Sophia and I returned from an emergency humanitarian mission in South Sudan. She began, her hand resting gently on her daughter's shoulder. "We were evacuating refugee camps ahead of advancing conflict zones." Sophia continued eating her pancakes, her movements calm but deliberate, though Lena noticed the slight tremor in her hands. Dr. Vasquez's voice softened, but the pain behind her words was unmistakable. "Sophia witnessed things no child should ever see," she continued. "She's been struggling with severe PTSD. At home, she stopped speaking, stopped eating regularly, stopped sleeping through the night. Our family therapist suggested that routine and a sense of normalcy might help her heal. So I've been driving her around the city every morning, hoping she'd find a place where she felt safe." Mrs. Patterson, who had been the loudest critic of Sophia's presence, shrank into her booth, her face flushed with shame. Frank, the construction worker, stared at his coffee mug, his earlier mockery now a bitter memory. Dr. Vasquez's gaze returned to Lena, her expression softening. "And she chose here," she said, her voice warm with gratitude. "She told me the first words she'd spoken in weeks were to you." Lena Martinez stood behind the counter of the diner, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped down the worn surface. She had always been the kind of person who noticed the small things, the way a customer's shoulders slumped under an invisible weight, or the flicker of fear in a stranger's eyes. That's why, 3 weeks ago, when a young girl with hollow cheeks and wary glances slipped into the diner, Lena hadn't hesitated. She slid a plate of eggs and toast across the counter, no questions asked, no payment expected. The girl, Sophia Vasquez, had barely spoken at first, but her quiet gratitude spoke volumes. Each morning since she'd returned, and Lena made sure there was always a warm meal waiting. Today, though, was different. A woman in a tailored suit entered the diner, her presence commanding yet gentle. She introduced herself as Dr. Elena Vasquez, Sophia's mother and a UN special envoy. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen the world's cruelties, but still held hope. "My daughter told me about you," Dr. Vasquez said, her eyes locking onto Lena's with an intensity that made the waitress's heart skip. She spoke of a kind woman who gave her breakfast every day without prying into her pain. She said you made her feel invisible in the most beautiful way, like her burdens didn't define her. Lena's throat tightened, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I just, she looked so hungry," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper, "and scared. I couldn't just do nothing." Dr. Vasquez's expression softened, but there was a fierce gratitude in her gaze. "For 3 weeks, you've been the one constant in her life," she said. "In a world that's felt like chaos to her, you gave her a safe place to breathe. You treated her with dignity when everything else seemed to crumble." A man stepped forward from the small group that had entered with Dr. Vasquez. His military dress uniform gleamed with unfamiliar insignia, and his posture was rigid yet respectful. "Ma'am," he began, addressing Lena directly, "I'm Colonel James Mitchell, UN Peacekeeping Operations. Dr. Vasquez and her daughter have been under our protection. We've been closely monitoring Sophia's recovery, and I need you to understand that your kindness has been a cornerstone of her healing." The diner, usually a hum of clinking plates and murmured conversations, fell silent. Frank, a burly construction worker who often teased Lena about her free lunch program, stared into his coffee mug as if it held the answers to questions he hadn't dared ask himself. His earlier jokes now seemed to weigh heavily on him, his usual bravado replaced by a quiet shame. David Chen, the diner's owner, emerged from the back office, his face pale as the gravity of the moment sank in. He'd given Lena an ultimatum just days ago: stop feeding the girl or risk her job. Now, standing in the presence of Dr. Vasquez and Colonel Mitchell, he looked like a man who had just realized the depth of his misjudgment. Dr. Vasquez's sharp gaze found him immediately. "Are you the owner?" she asked, her tone calm but laced with an undeniable authority. Chen nodded, his voice unsteady. "Yes, ma'am, David Chen. I understand you've had concerns about my daughter's presence here," Dr. Vasquez continued, her diplomatic training keeping her voice even, though there was steel beneath her margins. "If you had known she was the daughter of a diplomat, would that have made her hunger more valid? Would her need for kindness have been more acceptable?" Chen opened his mouth, but no words came. He stood frozen, the weight of her question pressing against him. "The true measure of a community," Dr. Vasquez went on, her voice steady and piercing, "is not how it treats those with titles or status. It's how it treats those who seem to have nothing. And for 3 weeks, only one person in this room has consistently shown what that means." She turned back to Lena, her expression softening. "I came here to thank you, Lena, and to ask if there's anything I can do to repay your compassion." Lena shook her head, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't need anything. Is she going to be okay?" Sophia, who had been quietly finishing her breakfast at a nearby booth, looked up. Her small frame seemed stronger today, her eyes brighter. "I'm getting better," she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying across the diner. "The nightmares aren't as big anymore. I'm not as scared, because of you." Her words were directed at Lena, and they landed like a gift, fragile but powerful. "You showed me that kindness still exists, even when everything feels broken." Colonel Mitchell stepped forward again, his tone formal but warm. "Ma'am, if you're open to it, the UN would like to formally recognize your humanitarian efforts. What you've done here embodies the very best of human compassion." Before Lena could respond, Sophia slid out of her booth and approached her. Without a word, she reached into her small backpack and pulled out a carefully wrapped object. Her small hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped a gleaming metal medallion attached to a blue ribbon. "This is for you," Sophia said softly. "It's a UN Children's Peace Medal. They gave it to me for helping other kids in the refugee camps, but I think you deserve it more." She stood on her tiptoes, carefully placing the ribbon around Lena's neck before wrapping her arms around her in a tight hug. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Really seeing me." The diner was silent, save for the faint creak of chairs against the linoleum floor. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly regular who had once muttered about Sophia's presence disrupting the diner's standards, stood slowly on. Without meeting anyone's eyes, she walked to Sophia's table and placed a $20 bill beside the empty plate. "For the breakfasts," she said quietly, her voice heavy with regret. "And I'm sorry for what I said." Frank followed, his heavy boots scuffing the floor as he placed his own crumpled bills on the table. One by one, other customers joined in, a businessman in a suit, a young couple, a truck driver who'd been sipping coffee in the corner. Each left money, not as payment for meals past, but as a quiet acknowledgement of their own failure to see what Lena had seen from the start, a child in need of care, not judgment. Dr. Vasquez watched the procession, her expression unreadable, but her eyes sharp with interest. "It seems," she said softly, "that your community is capable of learning." Lena Martinez stood behind the counter of the diner, her hands steady as she poured coffee, her heart always open to the stories of those who passed through. The place hummed with the quiet rhythm of clinking plates and murmured conversations, a small haven in Colorado Springs. Among the regulars was Sophia Vasquez, a young girl whose eyes carried a weight far heavier than her years. Her mother, Dr. Lena Vasquez, a UN special envoy, often sat nearby, her gaze protective yet weary, as if she could shield her daughter from memories too vast for a child to hold. David Chen, the diner's owner, kept the place running with a gruff warmth, while Mrs. Patterson, an elderly regular, often muttered complaints about Sophia's presence, her disapproval sharp but fleeting. Frank, a burly construction worker, sometimes teased Lena for her relentless kindness, though his jabs lacked real venom. Then there was Colonel James Mitchell, a UN peacekeeping officer, whose rare visits brought a quiet authority to the room. One day, as a small, impromptu ceremony wrapped up in the diner, Dr. Vasquez approached Lena, her expression softened by gratitude. She pressed a business card into Lena's hand, her voice steady but earnest. "Your compassion here, it's rare, Lena. More than I can say for many places we've been. If you ever want to channel that heart of yours into something bigger, humanitarian work could use someone like you." Lena glanced at the card, then at Sophia, whose smile shone brighter than it had in weeks, a fragile spark of hope. "I'll think about it," Lena replied softly, her voice warm but resolute. "But right now, I feel like I'm right where I belong." In the days that followed, the diner began to change in ways Lena hadn't anticipated. Word of her quiet kindness spread through Colorado Springs, not drawing gawkers or thrill seekers, but people who understood pain and healing. Veterans familiar with the shadows of trauma began stopping by, their presence steady and respectful. Social workers, recognizing Lena's unspoken empathy, lingered over coffee, sharing stories of hope. Teachers brought students who carried their own struggles, offering them breakfast and a moment of care before school. The diner became a sanctuary, its warmth radiating beyond its walls. 3 days later, Mrs. Patterson returned, her usual sharpness softened. She clutched a handwritten letter, her hands trembling slightly as she handed it to Lena. "This is for Sophia," she said, her voice catching. "I wrote about my grandson. He came back from Afghanistan haunted by nightmares, just like her. I wanted her to know she's not alone." She hesitated, wringing her hands. "And I owe you both an apology. I forgot how to see a child as a child." Lena accepted the letter, her heart swelling at the older woman's vulnerability, a crack in her once stern facade. Frank, the construction worker who once mocked Lena's softness, began a quiet ritual of his own. Each morning he slipped $5 onto the counter, his gruff voice barely above a whisper. "For the next kid who needs it," he'd say, his eyes avoiding Lena's, but his intent clear. His small act of generosity became a steady thread in the diner's evolving tapestry. During a lull in the lunch rush, David Chen pulled Lena aside, Guyi usual brisk demeanor softened by conviction. I want to start something, he said. Free breakfast for any kid who needs it. No questions asked. Lena started to protest, but he cut her off, his voice firm. You don't get it, Lena. Kindness like yours, it's better than any profit margin. It's what this place should be. His words landed like a promise, and Lena felt the weight of his belief in her. The most profound shift came from Sophia herself. She began returning to the diner with her mother during breaks from therapy, her steps a little lighter each time. On her third visit, she approached Lena, clutching a small notebook, her voice steadier than before. I've been writing, she said, opening the book to reveal pages filled with careful handwriting, about the camps, the other kids there. My therapist says it helps me process what happened. She paused, then turned to a specific page. But I wrote about you, too. Lena read the words, her breath catching. The lady at the diner never asked why I was sad. She didn't try to fix me. She just gave me eggs and toast and let me be. That's what I think angels do. They don't make a fuss. They just show up when you need them most. Tears welled in Lena's eyes as she handed the notebook back, her voice thick with emotion. You're going to touch so many lives by sharing your story, Sophia. The girl's smile was small but certain. Maybe, but first I just want to be a kid again. Dr. Martinez says I can do that now. A week later, Dr. Vasquez returned one final time before her reassignment to Geneva. She carried an official UN certificate, its edges crisp, recognizing Lena's quiet acts of humanity. This will be recorded in the UN's official records, she explained, her tone formal, but warm. But Sophia wanted you to have this too. She handed Lena a small photograph of Sophia, beaming alongside classmates in a bright Colorado Springs classroom. On the back, in Sophia's careful script, were the words, for Lena, who showed me that home isn't a place. It's wherever someone sees you and decides you matter. Dr. Vasquez clasped Lena's hand, her grip firm. The offer for humanitarian work stands, but I suspect you're exactly where you're meant to be. As they left, Lena stood in the quiet diner, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, casting golden light on the photo in her hands. Dust motes danced in the air like tiny spirits bearing witness to the moment. For the first time in years, Lena felt the full weight of her purpose settle into her bones. She'd always thought her work was small, just a plate of eggs, an open chair, a smile without judgment. But Sophia's story taught her something profound. In a world that often overlooked children carrying burdens too heavy for their hearts, a single act of seeing them, of treating them as human, could be enough to pull them back from the brink. Sophia's path could have been so different, her secrets too heavy to bear alone. But in that diner, through quiet kindness, Lena had given her a chance to heal, to hope, to simply be a child again. Lena Martinez stood behind the counter of the diner, her hands steady as she poured coffee, her eyes scanning the familiar faces of regulars and the occasional stranger. She was just a waitress in a small-town eatery, her apron stained with the morning's rush. But her heart carried a quiet resolve. She'd seen plenty in her years here, grief, joy, loneliness, but nothing prepared her for Sophia Vasquez, a young girl whose small shoulders seemed to carry the weight of a world that dismissed her as a burden rather than a soul worth cherishing. Sophia was a whisper of a girl, her eyes wide with a past too heavy for her age. She'd arrived at the diner one gray morning, her mother, Lena Vasquez, a UN special envoy, trailing behind her, exhaustion etched into her elegant features. The diner, run by David Chen, was a modest place, its checkered floors and vinyl booths a haven for truckers, retirees, and the occasional lost soul. But Sophia wasn't just another customer. Her quiet presence stirred something in Lena, a tug of recognition, as if the girl's fragility mirrored a piece of her own heart she'd long kept hidden. There were those who didn't take kindly to Sophia's presence. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly regular with a sharp tongue and a permanent frown, muttered under her breath about outsiders cluttering the diner. Her words stung, slicing through the hum of clinking dishes and murmured conversations. Frank, a burly construction worker nursing his third coffee, chuckled at Lena's attempts to make Sophia feel welcome, calling her softness a waste of time. Their judgment hung heavy in the air, a reminder of how easy it was to turn away from someone else's pain. But Lena couldn't look away. She saw the way Sophia clutched her worn notebook, her fingers tracing invisible words as if they were lifelines. Lena wondered what stories lived in those pages, what wounds the girl carried from a past marked by war and displacement. If Lena had listened to the voices urging her to keep her distance, Mrs. Patterson's complaints, Frank's mockery, or even the quiet fear of risking her job, she might have stayed safe, untouched. But safety wasn't worth the cost of Sophia's dignity. Kindness, Lena realized, wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity, as vital as the air she breathed. Every day, Lena encountered brokenness in its many forms. It wasn't always as obvious as a refugee girl with haunted eyes. Sometimes it was the coworker who spoke little and smiled less, the elderly neighbor whose mailbox overflowed with unopened letters, or the teenager picking at their food alone in a corner booth. These were the people who slipped through the cracks, unnoticed by a world too busy to care. They didn't need grand gestures or solutions to their problems. They needed something far simpler, yet infinitely rarer: to be seen, to be valued, to be treated as human in a world that often reduced them to shadows. Mrs. Patterson's harshness lingered in Lena's mind, but as the days passed, she began to see the older woman differently. One quiet afternoon, Mrs. Patterson's voice softened as she spoke of her grandson, lost to a war that still haunted her dreams. Her cruelty, Lena realized, wasn't rooted in malice, but in a pain she'd never learned to carry. It was a lesson in the hidden battles people fought, the kind that made them lash out at others to shield their own wounds. Understanding this didn't erase the hurt of her words, but it softened Lena's heart, reminding her that even the sharpest tongues often guarded the deepest scars. David Chen, the diner's owner, surprised Lena most of all. He'd always been practical, his focus on the bottom line, but Sophia's presence seemed to awaken something in him. He began to see the diner not just as a business, but as a sanctuary, a place where profit didn't have to come at the expense of compassion. He started offering free meals to those who couldn't pay, his gruff exterior giving way to a quiet generosity. Lena watched him transform, proof that even the most pragmatic hearts could learn to prioritize humanity over numbers. It was a reminder that the most enduring businesses were those that serve souls, not just stomachs. But it was Sophia's notebook that left the deepest mark on Lena's heart. One evening, the girl shyly shared a page, her handwriting small but deliberate. "Angels don't wear halos or announce their arrival," she'd written. "They just show up when you need them most, like a waitress who smiles and asks how you're doing, even when the world has stopped caring." Lena's throat tightened as she read the words. She wasn't an angel, just a woman who poured decent coffee and remembered how people liked their eggs. But maybe that was enough. Maybe the world didn't need heroes so much as it needed ordinary people willing to do small, extraordinary things. A UN certificate now hung on Lena's bedroom wall, a quiet nod to the kindness she'd shown Sophia and her mother. But it wasn't the certificate that filled her with pride. It was the photo Sophia sent from Geneva, where she'd started a pen pal program connecting refugee children with kids in American schools. The girl who once sat silently in the diner, her eyes shadowed by trauma, was now building bridges between worlds, using her pain to help others find their voices. It all began with a simple breakfast, a moment of connection in a small-town diner. Each morning, as Lena unlocked the diner's door, she carried a quiet question in her heart. Who would walk through today? Who might need a smile, a kind word, a reminder that they mattered in a world that often made them feel invisible? She'd learned something profound in her time with Sophia. Kindness didn't need a reason or a reward. It didn't need fanfare or recognition. It just needed to exist like a heartbeat, steady and unyielding, breathing life into the spaces where hope had grown thin.